My name's Russell. Back in the fall of 1996, I was working as a real estate photographer out of a small office in Nebraska. Farms mostly. Older couples selling land they couldn't work anymore, families splitting up an estate after somebody passed, banks unloading places that had gone under. I'd load my camera bag and a couple rolls of film into my station wagon and drive out to wherever the listing was, sometimes an hour or more past the last gas station, out where the radio started to hiss, and the only thing marking a turn was a leaning mailbox or a busted fence post. That afternoon, I'd been out past Coyle's Crossing, shooting an old dairy farm that had sat empty since the auction that spring. Nobody living there, no furniture inside, just the barn and the silo and a farmhouse with paint peeling off in long strips, curling up like burnt paper. The agent wanted wide shots of the pasture, the fence line, the outbuildings, everything that would make it look like somebody's dream instead of somebody's failure. I remember, while I was setting up a shot of the north pasture, catching sight of a truck parked way out on the field edge, engine off, just sitting there, rusted out, maybe an old Ford, hard to tell at that distance with the sun behind it. I figured it was a neighbor keeping an eye on the property, the way people do out in farm country. I gave it a wave. Nobody waved back. I stood there a second longer than I meant to, waiting to see if a door would open, if somebody would climb down and ask what I was doing. Nothing moved. I told myself the glare was probably too bad for whoever was in there to even see me. I didn't think much more of it at the time. I had a listing packet due Monday and 100 more frames to get before the light went flat. It was almost 10 that night by the time I finished packing my gear and got back on the road. My dashboard clock glowed orange. The radio was playing a country station out of Lincoln, low static crawling in every few miles, the signal fading in and out with the dips in the land. I had a paper road atlas open on the passenger seat, folded to the county roads, because the shortcut back to the highway wasn't marked with any signs I trusted, and I'd learned the hard way that half these gravel roads didn't match what the atlas claimed anyway. That's when I saw it. A cooler. One of those big red and white ones, sitting right in my lane, about a quarter mile ahead, caught square in my headlights. I slowed down, easing off the gas, my eyes flicking to the mirrors out of habit. There wasn't another car in sight, no farmhouse lights close enough to matter, nothing but black fields stretching out on both sides. Just corn stubble and a sky so full of stars it looked fake, the kind of sky you only get way out where there's no town light to wash it out. My first thought was that it had fallen off a truck bed, bounced loose on a pothole, the way things do out here, but the road was flat and straight for at least half a mile in either direction. Nothing had spilled here. No tools scattered, no ice melting into the gravel, nothing knocked loose alongside it. It looked placed, set down deliberately, the way you'd set a chess piece. I stopped about 30 feet short of it and just sat there with the engine running, my hands still on the wheel, letting the headlights do the looking for me. Something about it bothered me before I could even say why. It was the handle. It was turned to face my headlights, straight on, centered, like whoever set it down had walked around it afterward to make sure it faced exactly this direction, exactly toward whoever came down this road next. I almost got out, I really did. I had my hand on the door handle, already running through it in my head. Pull over, hazards on, walk up, flip the lid, probably somebody's forgotten beer cooler from a weekend of fishing, laugh about it later. But something made me look in my mirrors first, just a habit from driving these roads at night, checking behind me before I ever open a door out in the dark. That's when I noticed the tire tracks, fresh ones, cutting off the gravel road into the field to my right, tracks that hadn't been rained on, because it hadn't rained in a week, and the ground still held every ridge from the tires clean and sharp. Whoever made those tracks had pulled off the road and back into a field that had no gate, no drive, no reason at all to have a vehicle parked in it tonight. Not a combine, not a pickup checking on cattle. Just tracks running straight off the shoulder and into the corn, disappearing into rows that hadn't been cut back yet. I looked at the cooler again. It hadn't moved, obviously. Coolers don't move. But now it felt less like an obstacle sitting in my way and more like something set out on purpose. The kind of thing you leave when you want a car to stop right where you can see it best. I put the car in reverse. I didn't floor it. I just eased back slow, my eyes going between the mirror and the field to my right, my pulse ticking up loud enough that I could hear it over the radio static. My reverse light swept white across the corn stubble as I moved, and for 1 second they caught something deep between the rows, maybe 80 yards off the road. A shape too square and too flat to be a shadow. too still to be a fence post or a hay bale, a windshield, unlit, angled just enough to throw my own light back at me for half a heartbeat before the reverse lights swung past it and it disappeared back into the dark like it had never been there. I stopped breathing for a second. My hands went tight on the wheel, and for a moment I just sat frozen, waiting to see if anything else would move out there, waiting for headlights to snap on, for an engine to turn over. Nothing did. Then I kept backing up. I backed nearly 200 yards before I found a spot wide enough to turn the wagon around, my tires crunching loud on the gravel, every sound out there suddenly too loud. Even after I'd turned and started forward again, I didn't look at that stretch of field once more. I just watched the tree line in my mirror the whole way out, waiting to see if the shape in the corn had learned to move. I took the long way back, adding almost 40 minutes to my drive, looping around through Denby instead of cutting through on the county road the way I usually did. About 10 minutes into the detour, headlights came up fast behind me on the washboard gravel, bouncing in my mirror with every rut in the road. I eased over to let the car pass. It didn't pass. It just sat back there, 30 or 40 yards off my bumper, matching my speed exactly, close enough that I could see the shape of the grille but not the driver behind the glare. I slowed down to see what it would do. It slowed down too, holding the same distance, like it was tethered to me. Then, just before a crossroads, its high beams flashed once, hard, filling my whole rear-view mirror with white. Not a courtesy flash, not the quick double tap you give somebody to say thanks. It held a beat too long, long enough my eyes couldn't adjust, like whoever was behind that wheel wanted a clean look inside my car, my back seat, whether I was alone, whether there was anybody riding along who might see something and remember it. Then the lights dropped low again, and at the crossroads, the turn signal clicked on, and the car swung off toward a farmhouse with a porch light burning, taillights shrinking down a long dirt drive until they disappeared behind a windbreak of trees. Just some rancher heading home late from town, probably. That's what I told myself. I sat at the stop sign anyway, hands tight on the wheel, waiting for my heart to settle before I let my foot back onto the gas. I stopped at a gas station on the edge of Denby, the kind with a single pump out front and a bell that rang when you drove over the hose. The attendant, an older guy named Warren, came out in a canvas jacket to pump my gas since it was full service. I told him what I'd seen: the cooler, the tracks, the shape in the corn, the car that wouldn't pass. Somewhere in the middle of it, I heard my own voice shaking a little and didn't try to hide it. He got quiet for a second, screwing the gas cap back on slower than he needed to, then wiped his hands on a rag hanging out of his back pocket and said something that stuck with me for a long time after. That's not the first one I heard about this month. Different roads, different stuff sitting in the lane. A wheelbarrow tipped over out past Blaine County. A lawn chair sitting square in the middle of the road one morning, gone again by afternoon like it walked off on its own. Always at night, always way out where nobody'd see much. I asked if anybody had reported it. Sheriff's office has had a few calls, nothing they could pin down. He leaned against the pump, arms crossed, looking past me down the dark road like he could still see whatever it was that had been out there. I mentioned the empty dairy farm and the truck I'd seen parked out on the field edge that afternoon, watching me shoot. Warren's face changed a little at that, the easy small-town patience draining out of it. "That farm's been sitting vacant since the auction," he said. "Same as 2-3 other places out that way. There's been thefts. Somebody's been hitting the empty ones, stock trailers mostly, tools, a generator, a whole spool of fencing wire off one place before the family even had the estate sale. Whoever's doing it knows exactly which farms don't have anybody watching them, or they've got a way of finding out. That was the part that stayed with me longer than anything else that night. Somebody watching an empty farm being photographed for a listing would know, before almost anyone else in the county, that the property was vacant, that a car would be out there alone with a trunk full of camera gear, and that the driver would be leaving after dark with nobody expecting them anywhere in particular. I didn't drive home that night. I got a room in Denby and called the sheriff's office first thing in the morning from the phone bolted to the nightstand. The deputy who took the call didn't sound surprised, not the way you'd want a person to sound surprised when you tell them somebody left a cooler in the road and then followed you for 10 miles. "We've had reports out that way for a couple months now," he said. "No prints worth anything, no plates anybody could read in the dark. Whoever it is, they're careful and they're patient. They don't chase anybody down, they just wait to see who stops." I asked him straight out if he thought somebody had been waiting for me. There was a pause before he answered, long enough that I heard him breathe out slow on the other end. "I think if you'd stopped, you might not have called us this morning," he said. "That's honestly the safest thing I can tell you. We've had good luck asking around, gotten a few leads over the months, but nobody's ever actually caught in the act. By the time we get a call, whoever it was is already gone, and so's whatever they came for." That wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the one I believed. Before I left town, I drove back out toward Coyle's Crossing in the daylight, just once, just to see it in a light that made sense. The cooler was gone. Of course it was. So were the tire tracks, smoothed over by wind and dust like they'd never been there at all. The ground giving up nothing no matter how long I stood looking at it. The field where my reverse lights had caught that flat, square shape in the corn was just corn, rustling in the morning wind like it had never held anything at all. I still had the gas receipt from Warren Station, folded into my shirt pocket, printed on that thin curling paper that never lays flat. I took it out and looked at it there on the shoulder of the road, engine idling, corn moving on both sides of me. And that's when it landed on me all the way, sitting there in broad daylight with nothing around for a mile in any direction. If that cooler's handle had been turned even slightly differently, if it had looked just a little more like it had simply fallen there and a little less like something staged, I would have been out of my car and walking toward that field before I ever thought to check my mirrors. Whoever left it there hadn't been careless. They'd turned that handle exactly the way they wanted it turned, and they'd been counting on somebody like me to notice a small detail like that, get curious instead of cautious, and stop. I still shoot real estate out that way sometimes, when the listing's worth the drive. But I don't work past sundown anymore, no matter how good the light gets right before dark. I finish before 4, pack up while there's still sun on the fields, and I'm back on pavement before the shadows get long enough to hide anything. And every time I pass that stretch of road near Coyle's Crossing, I still find myself checking the shoulder, half expecting to see something red and white sitting there in the gravel, handle turned, waiting for somebody who hasn't learned yet to check their mirrors first. I folded the receipt back into my pocket and drove home.